The $39 trillion problem America cannot fix sounds like a title designed to scare you. And honestly, it should. Not because America is about to vanish tomorrow, not because the dollar suddenly stops working next week, not because some secret banker pulls a red lever and the economy falls through the floor. The problem is stranger than that. It is slower, quieter, more boring on the surface, which is exactly why it is so dangerous. America has built the most powerful economy in history on top of a very simple promise. Lend us money today, and we will pay you back later. That promise funds roads, aircraft carriers, Social Security checks, Medicare payments, tax cuts, bank rescues, wars, stimulus checks, and websites that still look allergic to modern design. It is not one bill. It is not one president. It is not one party. It is a national habit. The United States spends more than it collects, borrows the difference, rolls old debt into new debt, and tells itself the future will be richer enough to handle it. For a long time, that worked. Actually, it worked so well that the world helped pay for it. Foreign central banks, pension funds, banks, insurers, and retirement accounts bought treasuries because they were treated as the financial world's safe place. When markets panicked, money ran toward the dollar. When governments needed reserves, they often stored them in American IOUs. That is the magic trick. America's biggest liability also became the world's favorite asset. But here's the problem. An IOU is only safe as long as people believe the borrower can keep paying. And the borrower is now carrying a debt pile so large that the number barely feels real. The Treasury's own daily debt data, known as debt to the penny, tracks the total public debt outstanding. In March 2026, the Associated Press reported that the national debt had pushed past $39 trillion. $39 trillion. That is not a number you understand. Nobody really does. Your brain was built for food, danger, gossip, and finding your keys, not 39 trillion. So let's shrink it. 1 million seconds is about 11 and a half days. 1 billion seconds is about 31 years. 1 trillion seconds is about 31,000 years. 39 trillion seconds reaches back beyond cities, beyond farming, beyond the first person who looked at wheat and accidentally invented civilization. And America owes that in dollars. Now, debt by itself is not always bad. This is where people get lazy. If you borrow money to buy a house, start a business, build a bridge, or survive a once-in-a-century emergency, debt can be useful. Debt pulls future money into the present. Sometimes, that future money creates more future money. Great, congratulations, you discovered investment. But if you borrow every year just to keep the machine running, the debt stops being a bridge and starts becoming a treadmill. You are moving, but not forward. In fiscal year 2025, Treasury figures reported roughly $5.2 trillion in revenue and about $7 trillion in spending. That left a hole of roughly $1.8 trillion. In normal human language, the government earned a lot of money and still spent way more. Imagine making $5,000 a month, spending almost $7,000, and then telling your landlord, "Do not worry, I am the global reserve currency." That would not work for you. For America, it works until it gets expensive. And it is getting expensive. For years, politicians loved debt because interest rates were low. Borrowing felt almost free. The government could roll over old debt at cheap rates and pretend the bill was a future problem. Then inflation came back. The Federal Reserve raised rates, and suddenly, the world's safest IOU started sending the Treasury a very large invoice. The Wall Street Journal reported that, by one Congressional Budget Office measure, net interest on the public debt topped $1 trillion in fiscal year 2025. That means about $1 out of every $5 collected by the federal government went to interest. Not roads, not soldiers, not astronauts, not grand national projects with dramatic music and a flag waving in slow motion. Interest. That is money paid for the privilege of having borrowed money in the past. It is the financial equivalent of paying rent on yesterday. And the scary part is not that interest is high for 1 year. The scary part is that it compounds with the system. More debt means more interest. More interest means bigger deficits. Bigger deficits mean more borrowing. More borrowing means more debt. Round and round it goes, like a hamster wheel, except the hamster is the US Treasury and the wheel is on fire. The Congressional Budget Office has been blunt. In its 2026 outlook, CBO projected a deficit of about $1.9 trillion for the year, rising toward more than $3 trillion by 2036. It also projected federal debt held by the public moving from about 101% of GDP to around 120%. That phrase, debt held by the public, matters. The $39 trillion number is gross federal debt. It includes money the government owes to outside investors and money one part of the government owes another part, like Treasury securities held by federal trust funds. Debt held by the public is the cleaner market pressure number. It is the debt that has to be financed by investors outside those internal accounts. Either way, the direction is the same, up. And that is why the problem cannot be fixed easily, because fixing it means choosing pain. There are only a few broad options. You can cut spending, you can raise taxes, you can grow the economy much faster, you can inflate away part of the burden, or you can default, which is the economic version of setting your house on fire because the kitchen is messy. Default is not a serious option for the United States unless leaders want to detonate the bond market, the banking system, the dollar, and millions of retirement accounts at once. So forget default. Now look at the real choices. Cut spending? Sounds simple, until you ask, what spending? The federal budget is not just a mystery pile of waste guarded by lobbyists in expensive shoes. Waste exists. Stupid programs exist. But the big money is not hiding in a novelty drawer. The big money is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, interest, veterans benefits, and income support programs. Cut those hard enough to change the debt path, and you are not trimming fat anymore. You are cutting into promises. You are telling retirees their checks may be smaller, hospitals they may be paid less, the Pentagon no, and voters that promises they planned around are negotiable. Good luck putting that on a campaign poster. Raise taxes? Also simple. Until the bill arrives. The government could collect more from high earners, corporations, capital gains, payrolls, consumption, imports, estates, or all of the above. But every tax has a target, and every target fights back. Tax the rich too narrowly, and the math may not close. Tax the middle class, and the politics explode. Tax consumption, and poorer households feel it first. Taxes can help. They may be necessary, but there is no painless tax that quietly raises trillions while everyone claps. Okay, then grow out of it. This is the dream answer. If the economy grows faster than the debt becomes smaller relative to national income. This is how countries escape big debt burdens without dramatic collapse. More productivity, more workers, more innovation, more real income. Same debt, bigger economy. Beautiful. Now comes the annoying part. America is aging. Birth rates are lower. Health costs keep rising. Immigration is explosive. Infrastructure takes years. Education takes decades. Artificial intelligence might raise productivity, or mostly raise electricity demand and stock valuations. Growth is possible, but you cannot budget a miracle. Then there is inflation. Inflation quietly reduces the real value of old debt because future dollars are worth less than past dollars. Governments know this. Bond investors know this. Everyone pretends not to know this because it makes the room weird. But inflation is not free money. It is a tax you do not vote on. It hits savings, wages, groceries, rent, insurance, and trust. And when lenders expect inflation, they demand higher rates, which pushes the Treasury back into a bigger interest bill. So that door is dangerous too. This is the trap. Every solution creates a new political enemy. Cut benefits? Seniors revolt. Cut defense? Hawks revolt. Raise taxes? Taxpayers revolt. Use inflation? Consumers revolt. Do nothing? Bond investors eventually revolt. That last one is the quietest, until it is not. The US has a privilege most countries do not have. The dollar is still the dominant reserve currency. IMF reserve data still shows the dollar holding the largest share of global foreign exchange reserves, roughly 57% in recent quarters. That gives America room. It does not give America infinity. A reserve currency is not a trophy locked in glass. It is a network. It survives because everyone believes everyone else will keep using it. It is confidence stacked on confidence. Treasury securities are the floor under that system. Banks use them as collateral. Pension funds use them as safe assets. Foreign governments use them as reserves. So when America borrows, it is not just taking out a loan. It is manufacturing the asset the world uses to feel safe. That is powerful. It is also fragile in a very specific way. The world does not need to dump treasuries overnight for America to feel pain. It only needs to demand slightly higher yields. A little more risk premium. A little less trust. On $39 trillion of gross debt, small changes are not small. 1 percentage point sounds tiny, but 1% of $39 trillion is $390 billion a year. That is not pocket change. That is a major government program, a war, a tax cut, or a huge pile of money swallowed by interest. And mood matters in bond markets. Bond investors are not sentimental. They care about being paid back in money that still buys something. If they believe America will stabilize its debt, they lend cheaply. If they believe America will keep borrowing forever with no plan, they still might lend, but they ask for more. That more is the problem. Higher treasury yields do not stay inside Washington. They travel. They influence mortgage rates, corporate borrowing costs, credit cards, auto loans, startup funding, bank balance sheets, real estate valuations, the price of risk everywhere. The national debt is not sitting in a marble building far away. It is hiding inside mortgage rates, portfolios, city budgets, and the price your employer pays to borrow. This is why the phrase national debt sounds boring, but behaves like gravity. You can ignore gravity. You cannot negotiate with it. Now, to be fair, America is not Greece, Argentina, or a household. It borrows in its own currency, controls deep capital markets, and still has enormous productive, military, technological, and legal strength. That matters. Anyone saying the US is definitely about to collapse is selling you adrenaline. But anyone saying the debt does not matter is selling you a nap. The truth is worse for attention spans. The debt probably will not cause one clean cinematic crash. No dramatic countdown, no villain in a glass office, no final boss called bond market. The more likely outcome is erosion. A little more tax pressure, a little less room for public investment, a little more of the budget swallowed by interest, a little less flexibility when the next recession hits, a little more inflation temptation, a little more political anger because everyone feels squeezed and nobody agrees on why. This is how rich countries get weaker before they look poor. They do not run out of money all at once. They run out of easy choices. The debt problem is really a promises problem. America promised benefits without fully funding them, promised tax cuts without matching spending cuts, promised global military reach without a cheap global environment, promised voters they could have European-style social insurance, American-style low taxes, superpower defense spending, and no serious trade-offs. That is not a budget. That is a wish list with a treasury auction attached. And this is why it cannot be fixed by one speech, one election, one billionaire efficiency campaign, one tariff plan, one tax hike, or one clever accounting trick. The math is too large. The promises are too popular. The politics are too addicted to delay. Delay feels painless. Reform feels like betrayal. So Washington delays. It delays because the bond market still shows up. It delays because the dollar still dominates. It delays because voters punish pain now more than they reward stability later. And honestly, that is very human. If a doctor says you must change your diet today to avoid a heart attack in 15 years, you may nod seriously and then order fries. The fries are here. The heart attack is a concept. America's fiscal problem is the same. The benefits are here. The tax cuts are here. The spending is here. The crisis is abstract, until suddenly it is priced into every interest rate in the country. So what would fixing it actually look like? Not a slogan, a package. Slower benefit growth for higher income retirees. More revenue from people and companies most able to pay. Healthcare cost control. More workers. More housing. More productivity. Defense choices that match strategy. Budget rules with teeth. None of that is fun. None of that fits on a hat. All of it creates losers. But the alternative is pretending the largest borrower in human history can keep adding debt faster than income forever because the spreadsheet has not screamed yet. Maybe America gets away with it for a long time. Great powers often do. Rome did not fall in a quarterly report. Britain did not lose financial dominance in a single afternoon. Reserve currency systems change slowly, then suddenly everyone claims it was obvious. The dollar can remain dominant for decades and still become more expensive to defend. That is the nuance. The problem is not that $39 trillion makes collapse inevitable. The problem is that $39 trillion makes competence mandatory. And competence is the one thing markets cannot print. So when people ask, can America fix the debt? The answer is yes, mathematically, and no, politically. At least not without admitting something voters hate to hear. Someone has to pay, maybe through higher taxes, maybe through lower benefits, maybe through lower spending, maybe through higher inflation, maybe through slower growth because capital gets crowded out, maybe through a weaker dollar over time. But the bill does not disappear, it only changes names. That is the $39 trillion problem America cannot fix. Not because there is no solution, because every real solution forces America to become honest about what it promised, what it can afford, and who gets the smaller slice. And in a democracy, honesty is expensive. So the debt keeps climbing, the interest keeps compounding, the auctions keep coming, and the world keeps lending. For now. The question is not whether America can borrow another trillion. It can. The question is whether the richest country on earth can still make choices before the choices are made for it.